Order, please. Begin the day routine presenting reading petitions. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition bearing the signatures of 57 individuals who are concerned about the ongoing strike at regional residential services. The operative clause of which reads, "We, the undersigned people, call on the Ham government to drop its plan for a tax refund of $155 this year and instead use at least part of the $68 million for this refund to pay for a fair settlement that would end the strike of NSGU Local 66 members in the very near future." And Mr. Speaker, I have affixed my signature to that. Please.
Petition is tabled. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition bearing the signatures of 3,524 people. The operative clause, which reads, "We, the undersigned, hereby ask the Premier, Government and Legislature of Nova Scotia to end this fair untreatment of nursing home residents and their families by agreeing that the Department of Health will cover the health care provided in nursing homes just as it covers health care provided in hospitals and in home care." And Mr. Speaker, I am affixing my signature, and if you're keeping track, Mr. Speaker, this brings to a grand total of 22,678 Nova Scotians who have signed this petition.
Petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise with regards to an item very important to the portfolio of economic development. Mr. Speaker, in October of 2000, our government introduced an economic growth strategy for the province. Opportunities for Prosperity is a focused, consistent 10-year blueprint for a healthy, prosperous, and self-sufficient Nova Scotia. Just over 2 years into the plan, I'm pleased to table Opportunities for Prosperity, a progress report in the House today. It proves our growth strategy is working. Since launching our strategy, we've balanced 2 budgets, reduced taxes, and made important investments in our workforce and infrastructure. The results speak for themselves. We're now sharing in the highest levels of economic activity in the country. We've set record employment numbers, and we're watching businesses take root and expand right across this province. In the last 2 years, Mr. Speaker, we've doubled our investment in Nova Scotia's highways and bridges, found a way to keep the rail line operating in Cape Breton, and participated in Cape Breton, and those cars run even today, Mr. Speaker, and participated in 94 infrastructure projects with the federal and municipal governments. As well, through Team Guysborough, new opportunities are being realized for Canso and surrounding areas. Meantime, Mr. Speaker, we lead the country in terms of percentage of our communities that enjoy high-speed broadband connections, critical digital infrastructure that equips us to participate in the knowledge economy. Since 2000, we've committed millions of dollars to building new schools and renovating others. We're dramatically expanding enrollment to community college and helping adults through the School for Adult Learning. In its first year of operation, Nova Scotia Business Inc., or NSBI, has made significant investments in Nova Scotia companies, established large job growth partnerships, and extensive consultation from one end of Nova Scotia to the other. We've doubled our investment in InnovaCore's capital for companies pursuing innovation in the IT and life sciences sectors with an additional $8 million investment. We've committed 5-year funding for regional development authorities, a driving force for community economic development. We've helped create 2,800 sustainable jobs through the Cape Breton Growth Fund. At the same time, 10 new Community Economic Development Investment Funds, or CEDIFs, are making more than $4 million available for investment in local businesses. Mr. Speaker, good fiscal management has made all of this possible. We've balanced budgets and reduced taxes. Lower taxes will help Nova Scotians directly, while at the same time a competitive tax structure improves our business climate. Mr. Speaker, the report I'm tabling here today already reveals a more competitive Nova Scotia as a place to start and grow business, enjoy a healthy quality of life. With momentum on our side, we will continue to follow our blueprint for economic growth, targeted investment in key growth sectors, pragmatic budgetary and fiscal management, and a more competitive tax environment to ensure that Nova Scotia remains an economic leader in Canada. We must continue on course that we have set because it is working. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the minister for actually making a personal effort to see that I got this. I didn't get to read it before he even got started on his comment, but I do want to make a few observations. And the first thing I want to say, and I guess I've said it in this House before, is I'm always curious as to which world that the Tories live in that the rest of Nova Scotians don't. Well, it's a real world, actually, that has abandoned rural Nova Scotia right off the start. New opportunities, the minister says, being realized for Canso. Well, I'd love to hear the people of Canso tell me what they are, because they sure don't know what the new opportunities are for their area. We are going to experience and are starting to experience a very large shortage in skilled labor in this province, and somebody needs to address this either through the community college system or revamp what used to be the old vocational system. But anywhere you go, people I talk to who are in this sector, they say you can't find anybody under 40 years of age who are skilled laborers or skilled workers. And this is going to impact the ability of this province to grow economically in a way that the minister doesn't even realize. Small business has really not been helped by this government at all. They still struggle trying to get financing. They're left at whatever the graces of the banks are. And I would say to the minister, if he really wants to look at some way to rev up the engine, the economic engine of this province, he should look at support for small business. They create more jobs than the large business sector does, and they get no breaks. And as far as a competitive tax environment, Nova Scotia has always had a competitive tax environment. It never attracted business, and yet this province has always tried to offer concessions to business that have been fly-by-nighters, have never proven to be committed to the province, and yet the people who are committed, the people who are here every day, working every day, can't get a break from government in any way, shape, or form. This has been a government that has turned its back on the resource sector, which is the backbone of rural Nova Scotia in terms of agriculture, forestry, and fishery. These are areas that you can generate wealth. We all talk the same talk when it comes to value added, but nobody is willing to invest in those companies who are interested in taking trees and creating more than just sticks of lumber with them. And I can think of one example in the honourable member from Colchester North area, which was Northern Lumber, making hardwood flooring. Couldn't get a break from this province in any way, couldn't get hardwood to create the product that they had a market for. So before the minister spends too much time slapping himself on the back, we need to go a lot further than we're going in terms of economic development in this province, because young people are still leaving Nova Scotia to get work elsewhere, and if anywhere in this province that applies, it's in Cape Breton. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for providing me with a copy of his release in advance. A release called Opportunities for Prosperity, a Progress Report. Well, Mr. Speaker, I suggest to you it should be titled A Lack of Progress Report. And Mr. Speaker, this from a minister who has been reduced to junior status in this province. The Ministry of Economic Development has been reduced to the Office of Economic Development. And Mr. Speaker, this ministerial statement is nothing more than the government patting itself on the back for doing nothing. It's a classic work, Mr. Speaker, of smoke and mirrors with a pre-election thought in mind. That's all this document is here today. Mr. Speaker, the minister is only 2 years into a plan which has seen the creation of only 18,000 jobs. And I want you to examine that, Mr. Speaker. That let's examine and compare that. In the last 2 years of the previous Liberal government, the economy grew by over 7%, Mr. Speaker, and we created between July 1997 and August 1999 28,000 new jobs in this province, and those figures are from the Finance Department of this province, not from me. Mr. Speaker, the government is not building schools at the same rate as the previous government. We built 32 schools, and he boasts about the ones that they're building. Mr. Speaker, a lot of those schools were announced 4 years ago under the previous education minister in this province and are just now being built by this government. Mr. Speaker, this government is about Band-Aid solutions, whether it be their small initiative in Canso, which is no initiative, to the so-called solution for the Cape Breton Rail. And I might remind you, Mr. Speaker, and members of this House, we still don't have a permanent plan for the future of that railway in Cape Breton tabled before this House. Mr. Speaker, that's another get from here to there position of this minister to get him through the next election. And Mr. Speaker, NSBI is a private club that hands out money to a select few in this province. Now, I'll give you an example, Mr. Speaker. In the first year of that NSBI's mandate, they spent $15 million in this province. Of that total, only 45,000 of that total went to Cape Breton Island, the entire island. 45,000 out of 15 million went to Cape Breton. And the minister can have the gall to stand in his place and say they're doing something for areas of this province.
He's a minister from Cape Breton.
And he's a minister from Cape Breton. You're absolutely right. Thank you for the helpful hint. In fact, NSBI has no business retention and expansion office located in the second largest municipality in this province. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, that NSBI has only one member from Cape Breton Island out of 12. So what chance do the people have at Cape Breton Island of accessing any of the money needed to grow and expand small business in that part of Nova Scotia?
Didn't even get 112.
And what is worse, he talks about the economic record. What is worse about this government is that they're still borrowing money to get them through year to year. This government, when they said they wouldn't borrow money, have borrowed $500 million in the past 3 years, are borrowing another $128 million this year, and are going to preside over the long-term debt in this province going to $12 billion in the next 2 years. That's economic prosperity. Well, I'm sorry. I don't believe that, and I'm sure Nova Scotians are not going to believe it either. But the worst representation is the Cape Breton Growth Fund. I've never seen a minister and a government try to piggyback their way into announcements at Cape Breton on federal government initiatives with the kind of money they put on the plate. A paltry $2 million a year for 5 years, and then they've said, that's enough. We don't need to do anything more in Cape Breton. Well, I'm going to tell you, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, what we see here today, this document, is probably the best example of fiction that was ever presented to this House in the history of this legislature. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Government notice of motion. Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister of Health. The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas there are more than 9,000 registered nurses who make a difference to the lives of Nova Scotians every day, whereas last night in an awards banquet, 9 very deserving RNs were recognized for their particular contributions to the nursing profession and to the health of Nova Scotians. Whereas the awards included the Client and Public Health Advocacy Award, Excellence in Nursing Practice Awards, and honorary life memberships in the College of Registered Nurses in Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the nurses who were honoured last night. Donna Pinio from Berwick, Susan Marsh from Dartmouth, Jeanette McKinnon from Glace Bay, Maureen Topley from Truro, Mary Ellen Curley from New Glasgow, Sheila Dion from Yarmouth, Sheila Billard from Sydney Mines, Phyllis Glenn from New Glasgow, and Norma Price from Halifax. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas public works infrastructure, facilities and services are of vital importance to the health, safety and well-being of the people of the province, and whereas such facilities and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works engineers and administrators. And where it is in the public interest for the citizens and civic leaders of this country to gain knowledge of and maintain a progressive interest in the public works needs and programs of their respective communities. Therefore, be it resolved that the week of May 18 to 24 be designated as Nova Scotia Public Works Week, and I encourage all members to recognize the substantial contribution of public works engineers and administrators. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas primary health care is a community-based approach to care and will require involvement from families, health organizations, government, and community groups, and whereas today nearly 300 people are attending the first ever joint conference on primary health care taking place in Dartmouth, whereas the college...
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
And whereas the College of Registered Nurses of Nova Scotia is hosting the conference in partnership with the Department of Health, the College of Health Services Executives, the Medical Society, the College of Family Physicians, and Health Canada, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me today in applauding our healthcare partners who are providing the important leadership necessary for all Nova Scotians to have easier access to essential health services closer to home. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas comedian Tracy McDonald, 28, is the Star Search's latest talent, winning $100,000 US last night on the CBS talent show, and whereas from Dartmouth, Ms. McDonald had her mother and twin sister in the audience with her father and brothers watching faithfully from their home here in Nova Scotia, and whereas with a perfect score from one of the judges, the win also lands Ms. McDonald an appearance on one of CBS's top-rated shows and a development deal with a major American network. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Tracy McDonald on her great achievement and the fabulous opportunity that she has earned, and wish her continued success in her future career endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Just want to order, please. This is government notice of motion. But the House... Anyway, no, it doesn't have to read it again. The House did agree to that and has passed. The Honourable Member Colchester Musqueam Valley. Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, a member of the NDP caucus begged leave to table a petition alleging that it was on behalf of Lower Truro residents, Mr. Speaker, and I want to inform you and the NDP caucus that Lower Truro resides in the county of Colchester. The petition clearly states that the NDP want a 1 kilometre buffer zone around homes from agriculture land, a 1 kilometre buffer zone, and I think they should go out into the farming community, explain just what they're trying to do to the farmers in Nova Scotia. They should stand up and be counted.
Order, please. It's not a point of order. It's clarification of facts for the House. Any further government resolutions? Introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 134 of the Acts of 1923, an act to incorporate the Maritime Oddfellows Home. Is that right? No? No? Is that all I said?
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 134 of the Acts of 1923, an act to incorporate the Maritime Oddfellows Home.
Bill 55, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 134 of the Acts of 1923, an act to incorporate the Maritime Oddfellows Home.
This bill will be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The Honourable Member for the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tracy MacDonald of Dartmouth has become one of Canada's premier comics, appearing at several well-known comedy festivals, including the Just for Laughs in Montreal. And whereas Tracy MacDonald won $100,000 US last night on the CBS talent series Star Search. And whereas it's clear that Tracy is a star whose zenith has far from peaked, to the delight of her parents, Howard and Esther MacDonald, and of all Nova Scotians. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Tracy MacDonald of Dartmouth on her victory last evening on the CBS talent series Star Search, and wish her every success in her career as one of Canada's outstanding comedians. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
We would be remiss if we didn't join in the other caucuses on Ms. MacDonald, but it's with great honour that we acknowledge. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tracy MacDonald of Dartmouth has been a favourite on the Halifax Comedy Fest and madly off in all directions presented on CBC Radio 1. And whereas last evening the 26-year-old Dartmouth High School graduate won the comedian title on the CBS show Star Search, beating out two other comedians for the title. Whereas Ms. MacDonald will perform on this Friday night's Star Search Battle of the Champions, which will provide an incredible opportunity to advance her career. Therefore, it be resolved the members of this House recognize Tracy MacDonald's talents and wish her every success in the Star Search Battle of the Champions this Friday. And I would ask for waiver of notice and passage.
Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annap.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Bridgetown's fire hall, built in 1948 and expensive to maintain and operate, no longer meets the needs of the fire department. And whereas the 40-member department is proposing a new building at a better location to house its equipment and provide room for training, and a fire hall project committee has been struck and is working to raise the monies. And whereas the community is showing its financial support for this project, like the staff of the Bridgetown Bank of the Bank of Nova Scotia, pledging to raise $5,000, which will be matched by its head office, and the Royal Bank, which donated $5,000, and the Bridgetown Lions Club, which has made a generous pledge of $100,000. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House wish the Fire Hall Project Committee continued success in raising funds and with their application for infrastructure money, and encourage individuals, groups, and businesses to get behind this project, which is extremely important to the area and to everyone in the community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a sure mark of a pending election campaign is an epiphany on the part of the incumbent party when opposition positions so fervently reject it earlier, as the ugly ducklings of politics suddenly lose all their warts and pimples as the government comes a-wooing. And whereas skyrocketing auto insurance rates in Nova Scotia have induced an epiphany of sorts in the Premier and the Minister of Environment and Labour, who after months of rejecting it and refusing to include it in a public consultation on auto insurance, have suddenly said a driver-owned system might be the answer. And whereas perhaps the epiphany here springs from the election trail epiphany of the Lord Tories in New Brunswick, who caved to insurance companies to call a cut to benefits, now discover on the hustings that folks may indeed want driver-owned insurance, giving them the fairest and lowest rates. Therefore, be it resolved that the Premier and the Minister of Environment and Labour be congratulated on finally admitting that the NDP suggestion for a public auto insurance system is an option to lower rates in Nova Scotia, with the fond hope, Mr. Speaker, that their epiphany is real and not inspired only by a coming provincial election. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Order, please. Order, please. Resolution is way too long. The honourable member, Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Victorian Order of Nurses has served Canadians from across the country, enabling individuals to stay in their homes and receive the care they require, and whereas VON Canada has been providing nursing service to families here in Nova Scotia for over a century, and whereas the Cape Breton branch has provided immeasurable support for individuals and families throughout the island, providing compassion and care to those in need. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House recognize the contributions made by the VON and their community work in making our province a better place to live, and ask the Premier to proclaim May 18th to 24 as VON Week here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I am presenting this resolution on behalf of the MLA from Preston. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that at a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Portia White Prize is awarded annually in recognition of excellence achieved in the arts by a Nova Scotian and includes a $25,000 prize. And whereas a 2002 recipient of the award is Halifax filmmaker Dr. Sylvia Hamilton, who credited the last Portia White with paving the way for other African artists in Nova Scotia. And whereas to date, Dr. Hamilton has released 4 films, her rise to critical acclaim stemming from the NFB-produced Black Mother, Black Daughter, which traveled from festival to festival in North America and Europe. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Dr. Sylvia Hamilton on receiving this prestigious Portia White Prize and wish her continued success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers make an enormous positive impact on the communities they serve, and whereas Irene Witherspoon has volunteered her time and efforts for a wide variety of worthy causes and important posts, so many that it would require 2 or 3 resolutions to list them all. And whereas Ms. Witherspoon was honoured on April 30th in Upper Rawdon by the municipality of East Hants for her noteworthy contributions to the betterment of the communities in the corridor area. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Irene Witherspoon for her outstanding volunteer efforts in Hants East and for the recognition bestowed upon her as the Municipality of East Hants Volunteer of the Year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I request waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Archbishop Vincent Waterman has served the African Orthodox parish of St. Philip, Whitney Pier as parish priest for the past 20 years. And whereas Archbishop Waterman has set an outstanding example of dedication, commitment, and solidarity with the people in his years at St. Philip's. And whereas this Legislative Assembly wishes to express its appreciation for Archbishop Waterman's leadership and service to the African Orthodox Church and to the community of Whitney Pier and area, resolved that this House commend Archbishop Waterman for all that he has done and wishes him many years of health and happiness in the future. I'd like to seek waiver of notice on that, Mr. Speaker, and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that at a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Atlantic Police Academy Police Science Cadet graduation ceremony has recently taken place in Prince Edward Island, and whereas 20 cadets representing Nova Scotia, PEI, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Alberta were graduating in the ceremony, and whereas Jen Russell of New Ross was one of the graduates this year receiving the Harvey O. Brown Memorial Award and also the PEI Association of Chiefs of Police Award for her essay entitled Ethics in Policing. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Jen Russell on graduating from the Atlantic Police Academy as well as receiving the Harvey O. Brown Memorial Award and the PEI Association of Chiefs of Police Award, and wish her continued success in her future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Walter and Regis Day, lifelong residents of Alder Point Road, Bredor, Cape Breton, celebrated their 74th wedding anniversary on April 23rd, 2003. Mr. and Mrs. Day celebrated this remarkable occasion along with their family, which consists of 10 children, 44 grandchildren, 61 great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. And whereas Walter Day and Regis Jessom were married by Father Barry of St. Joseph's Church in Bedore on April 23, 1929. Walter and Regis Day were attended by Mr. Alex Jessom and Ms. Margaret Day. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House extend warmest congratulations and best wishes to Walter and Regis Day as they celebrate their 74th wedding anniversary. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 19th to May 19th marks National Physiotherapy Month in Canada, a campaign started in 1984 to raise awareness of the valuable role physiotherapists play in health care. And whereas physiotherapists have been there to care for the returning amputees from 2 world wars, for those ravaged by the polio epidemics of the 40s and 50s, and now form an essential part of our healthcare system, ensuring our physical mobility. And whereas the history of physiotherapy shows that women have been innovative pioneers at a time when women in healthcare fields other than nursing was frowned upon. Therefore, be it resolved that this House recognize April 19th to May 19th as National Physiotherapy Month and the many innovative efforts of physiotherapists throughout the years, particularly of women, that have made them an essential part of our healthcare system. And, Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 3rd year of the Glace Bay Lacrosse Association began play this week, featuring 125 players in a variety of age categories, and whereas this group of players will participate in the novice, peewee, bantam, and midget junior division, and whereas the league has seen very few problems over the past 2 years, with the majority of participants interested in having fun. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House wish the Glace Bay Lacrosse Association the greatest success in the upcoming year as it begins its 3rd season of Canada's official national sport. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Kingston's Fran Alcott, 83 years old, has turned her love of knitting into a way to raise thousands of dollars for our local branch on the Christmas Daddies, and whereas also an accomplished dog judge, Miss Alcott has for the past 20 years coordinated a great number of volunteer knitters to help her in her quest. And whereas Miss Alcott doesn't limit her charity to the Christmas Daddies. Last year, she raised $1,300 for Soldiers Memorial Hospital in Middleton by selling tickets on one of her unique Afghans. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House thank Fran Alcott for her dedication to helping those in need and congratulate her on the success of her efforts. She's truly an inspiration to all and a remarkable Nova Scotian. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a new study by Dalhousie University concludes that industrial fishing has reduced the world's large fish stock by 90%, whereas the basic message of the study is our capacity to harvest fish has become our undoing, and if we do not significantly reduce efforts, our oceans will be barren. Whereas the study is a siren call to fisheries and oceans, the fishing industry, and to Nova Scotia that we need to radically change our fishing efforts if we want a sustainable industry. Therefore, this House congratulates and thanks Dalhousie University for its groundbreaking study on the effects of industrial overfishing and commits to pushing for a sustainable fishing effort in Canada's deep-sea fisheries. I ask for a waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor? Order, please. Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The order, please. It's very difficult to hear the resolutions. The clerks can't hear them. I can't hear them. There's too much noise in the chamber. There was a request for waiver in the last one. There's some people are saying yes, no. Was it agreed? Here, no. The notice is tabled. You don't remember Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Reverend Vincent J. McClellan has spent his entire career as a teacher at St. FX University, influencing generations of students, and whereas May 30th will mark the 50th anniversary of Father McClellan's ordination to the priesthood, and whereas since his retirement, Father McClellan has continued to serve many organizations in Antigonish as their chaplain. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House recognize the contributions Father McClellan has made to St. FX University through his 50 years of dedicated service and wish him many more years of health and happiness. I would ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Monsieur le Président, à une date ultérieure, j'ai l'intention de proposer l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que l'école secondaire de Paramba participe récemment à Sydney au championnat annuel de badminton organisé par la Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation, attendu que l'école Paramba se méritait la première place dans la catégorie garçons seniors en simple et la catégorie équipe junior en rapportant la victoire de 4 de 5 épreuves, attendu que leur succès mérite d'être souligné, étant donné que l'école Paramba compte seulement 310 élèves et que ce tournoi de badminton était ouvert à toutes les écoles de la province, indépendamment de leur grosseur. Qu'il soit résolu que cette Assemblée transmette ses félicitations aux élèves et à l'école pour leurs accomplissements et leur souhaite autant de succès dans toute compétition future. Speaker, I'll repeat in English. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas École de Paraba High School recently competed in Sydney in the Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation of Badminton Championships, and whereas École Paraba won the Senior Boys Singles Championship and the Junior Team title, winning 4 of the 5 events, and whereas their success is especially noteworthy, as École Paraba has only 310 students, and the badminton competition was open to all schools of the province regardless of size. Therefore, be resolved that this House congratulate the students and their school on their accomplishments and wish them as much success in their future competitions. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice the question be put without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers have always been the backbone of our communities and their contributions need to be recognized. And whereas Sherry Connolly of Knoll is one such volunteer who has devoted her time and talents to countless projects and undertakings in her community. And whereas the municipality of East Hants chose to recognize Sherry Connolly's efforts on April 30th by honoring her as one of their volunteers of the year, therefore be resolved that this House congratulate Volunteer of the Year for East Hants, Sherry Connolly, on her award and recognize her contributions to the community of Knoll. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Now, Member Cape Breton Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sylvia Chesson has been chosen as the recipient of the Canadian Mental Health Association Consumer Participation Award at the CMHA National Conference in Ottawa on November the 18th, 2002. This award honors an individual that best exemplifies self-determination and a strong sense of advocacy. And whereas Ms. Chesson was instrumental in the establishment of Crossroads, the region's first program within the Cape Breton District Health Authority for individuals living with mental illness. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Sylvia Chesson as she is honored as a recipient of the Canadian Mental Health Association Consumer Participation Award 2002. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Middleton Pee Wee girls hockey team has recently taken the silver medal in provincials, winning all of their round-robin games to advance to the championship game against East Hants, and whereas the girls had an incredible season with thanks due to coaches Monique Botor and Helen Mercier, and whereas the team is comprised of Megan Hudgens, Jillian Forgeron, Kim Archibald, Chelsea Doyle, Stephanie Banks, Katie Brown, Emily Ann Hicks, Tabitha Bent, Alicia Williams, Carly Gillis, Chelsea Ross, Alexandra Banks, Courtney Balcom, Allie Chipman, Lee McCabe, Samantha Parson. And therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Middleton Pee Wee girls hockey team on their silver medal from the provincial tournament and wish them continued success in seasons to come. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Just before we go on to the next resolution, I'd like to bring to the attention of the honourable members two people in the East Gallery. You'll recognize the gentleman, Shazad Predhim, who is one of our pages here, who's been working during this session, has done a great job. But very importantly, I want to introduce his wife, Hamida Predhim, who has just arrived here from Pakistan after attempting to get here for 2 years. But is equally important, maybe more importantly, Hamida is a practicing physician who has practiced for 1 year in Pakistan, who is now going to be taking her Canadian medical license and wants to remain in Nova Scotia in the metro area and practice as a doctor. Ask to rise and receive a warm welcome in the House. We certainly welcome our guests to Gower, but more importantly, we welcome our new Nova Scotians. Thank you very much. She's welcome in all 52 constituencies, according to the member from Sackville-Cobequid. Thank you. Further resolutions. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas QP1 Daryl Cardinal of Bridgetown, Nova Scotia, who is currently a member of Corps 26, Cornwallis Sea Cadet Corps, was awarded the Lord Strathcona Trust Fund Medal. And whereas to receive this medal, the cadet must possess a wide variety of training experience over a period of not less than 3 years, be qualified to a superior level in physical fitness, have attended at least one summer training course of 6 weeks duration, have qualified with distinction to a training level not below Silver Star, and be regarded by peers and supervisors as exemplifying the model cadet. And whereas Daryl has met all these criteria and been recommended for this honour, therefore be it resolved all members of this House join the sponsoring organizations, the Navy League of Canada and the Royal Canadian Legion, and extend our congratulations to QP1 Cardinal on this momentous achievement. And I would ask for waiver.
Waivers, agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 31st Annual Provincial Black Basketball Association Invitational Tournament is taking place in Halifax, and whereas this tournament continues to be an important part of the heritage and culture of the black community, with teams coming from all over Canada, the United States, and for the first time, a team from Bermuda. And whereas the Provincial Black Basketball Association launched Back to the Books at the North Branch Library on Wednesday, May 14th, where the athletes will go into schools to speak to youth from grades 8 to 12 about the importance of academic achievements. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House congratulate the organizers of the Provincial Black Basketball Association, including Irvin Carvery, Brian Darrell, Carl Gannon, Wendell Skier, and Clayton Gannon for their commitment and dedication to efforts to foster both athletic and academic success in the youth of the community. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers, agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas, as another hockey season in the Valley High School Hockey League has come to a close, players who have stood out in the game are being recognized for their hard work and dedication to their teams. And whereas Kyle Hicks of Berwick, a player on the West Kings District High School hockey team, was awarded the league's Most Valuable Player award, and whereas Sean Taylor of Aylesford, also a player on the West Kings District High School hockey team, received the Coach's Award for his efforts this year, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate both Kyle and Sean on the receipt of the awards honoring their ability and team commitment, and wish them continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Now, member Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to present this resolution on behalf of the honourable member for Cumberland South. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the widows of veterans across Canada are asking the federal Liberal government to change its policy regarding the benefits of the Veterans Independence Program, or as some people refer to it, the VIP program. And whereas widows who are left to survive after the passing of their husbands have to try to exist without this program, which terminates 1 year after the veteran passes away. And whereas it is incumbent upon all Canadians to ensure that veterans and their families are treated with respect and never forgotten, and never forget the commitment that they made to this country to ensure democracy lives on for all of us. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House, the Nova Scotia Legislature, encourage the federal government to reassess the Veterans Independence Program and make the benefits of that program available not only to the veterans of this country, but as well to their widows who are left behind after their passing, as they attempt to remain in their own homes and to live out the rest of their years in comfort. And, Mr. Speaker, on your behalf, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Thank you. And that will be submitted to the federal government on behalf of all members of the House. Thank you very much. Order, please. Orders of the day or questions put by members. Oh, sorry, the honourable member Cape Breton South on a point of order.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the question period today, we were not informed that members of the front benches weren't going to be here, and particular members of the front benches are very important to us in our questions here today. And I would ask then perhaps that the government House Leader would consider reverting to or going to committee of the whole House to start public bills for second reading until the minister that's absent returns to the House, so we can ask him some questions. Because we weren't informed he wasn't going to be here.
All member Sackville Cobequid, same point of order.
In support of this point of order, and Mr. Speaker, we aren't allowed to make reference to the presence or absence of a particular member. But of course, if the question period were to go on, then it would become quite obvious as to who is not present. And Mr. Speaker, the gentleman who members would like to question, in fact, had told me in front of the media in a scrum outside earlier this session that it was his practice always to extend the courtesy to members of the opposition if he was going to be absent. And Mr. Speaker, he's not here right now, and there are questions.
I think the House has got the point. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I cannot attest to this, but I believe that a phone call was made to each of the caucus opposite. Well, I'll have to check on that because I didn't do it, but I understand somebody else did, advising the two opposition parties that the Premier was attending and speaking at the annual Canadian National Institute for the Blind Vision Luncheon and Fundraiser. And it started at noon, and he expected to be here approximately 1:15. Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to you the fact that the Premier is in the province, he doesn't have to have a replacement. And Mr. Speaker, we have the front benches full today, so I see no reason why question period cannot commence immediately.
Order, please. All member Sackville Cobequid.
And I can't verify that the call didn't come in after 12 o'clock or after the time that we had left to come over to this House, Mr. Speaker. That may have happened, but certainly it would not inconvenience the government, and I'm sure the government would like to have the opportunity to have the Premier to be here and be accountable in one of the last question periods. And so if we were to delay it for 15, 20 minutes or half an hour so that he could be present, Mr. Speaker, it certainly would not interrupt the business of the House at all.
Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader in response.
Mr. Speaker, as I say, we have cabinet here, and it's not untowards for the Premier to be late getting here. Heaven help us, lots of members arrive late for question period. Mr. Speaker, the Premier will be here during question period. I suggest we start.
Order, please. Order. Oral questions put by members. Question period begin at 12:57 and then 1:57. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we learned that all the nursing homes in Nova Scotia have seen an increase of $5 to $6 since April 1st, and another $3 hike is planned for November. This means that seniors lost half of the $12.75 per diem relief before they ever got it, Mr. Speaker. The minister says that she has no control over the cost of per diem rates. Well, Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. her department approves every increase before it goes into effect. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister of Health, why did you implement a per diem supplement that you knew full well that most of it would never reach the pockets of seniors?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I believe it was I who informed people that the per diem increases that are granted to nursing homes are in fact approved by the Department of Health in the yearly business planning process. Mr. Speaker, it is normal for per diems to go up a certain amount every year. Mr. Speaker, that has nothing to do with the relief that we are giving to seniors in terms of the medical costs of nursing care. Seniors are benefiting from that decrease in the medical cost, and they will benefit further next year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister knows that that's not true. The Ham government had the ability to pay for health care costs for nursing home residents this year. Instead, they chose Tory election checks and more big business handouts. They chose to offer a $12.75 per diem nursing home fee supplement, and a piddly one at that, Mr. Speaker. On April 1st, residents of Gables Lodge saw their per diem increase by $12.04. That's nearly every penny of the $12.75 supplement before they even got it. My question to the Minister of Health is, nursing home residents and their families want an answer. Why are you making them wait to 2007 to help them?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the help that we are giving seniors is not only with the medical cost, as talked about, but it is also with the changes we made to the system last November. And Mr. Speaker, to that particular case of 1204, to the best of my knowledge and the best of my staff's knowledge, Mr. Speaker, that was not a pre-approved increase, and we will be looking into that particular increase. The average increase in per diem costs across the province, Mr. Speaker, was about $5 a day this year, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't end there, because rates will go up by another $3 a day to cover wage increases in November. In 2001, the average daily rate was $139. The 2002 rate climbed to $148. Goodness knows what it will be by the end of 2003. But you can bet your bottom dollar, Mr. Speaker, that most increases will surpass $12.75 a day. So I want to ask the Minister of Health, why can't you admit that the $12.75 was more about the election than offering meaningful relief to nursing home residents?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the commitment we are making to nursing home residents is to take over the medical care costs of nursing care, Mr. Speaker, which are on average about $85 a day out of $150 total cost. That is our commitment. It is a $40 million commitment, and we intend to keep it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia Resources has been a boondoggle since it was started under a progressive Conservative government. And Mr. Speaker, if the McClellan government didn't invest in Sable, the company would be worthless today. Because of that investment, Mr. Speaker, the government was able to get back $400 million. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, another $400 million in debt still remains. Yesterday, it was announced, Mr. Speaker, that the last few remnants of NSRL have been sold for a paltry $5.8 million. These last remnants, Mr. Speaker, is left over from Tory investments. Could the minister inform the House if he believes $5.8 million is a fair price for the last remaining assets of Nova Scotia Resources Limited?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker, I would refer that question to the minister responsible in SRL.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite, surprised he referred the question to the Minister of Energy because I do have the responsibilities for it. Mr. Speaker, this is the same member that said that we shouldn't sell an SRL, that we should keep it. And this is the same member whose party is saying that they're preoccupied about debt. And the fact of the matter is that we did sell NSRL, and the combined total is about $385 million, Mr. Speaker. That's $385 million that this province doesn't owe today. So I find it very difficult to understand the member opposite's question, because he seems to be speaking out of both sides of his mouth, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member of Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Not surprising, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister of Energy would refer that to the Minister of Finance, because this is the second Minister of Energy that doesn't know what's going on in his department. My first supplementary is to the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, remember, this Minister of Finance was part of a government that started NSRL, and Mr. Speaker, he's the only minister that gets a chance to bankrupt the province twice in his political career. Mr. Speaker, Pengrowth is offering to purchase NSRL's interest in all significant discovery licenses except one. Shell Canada will purchase NSRL's interest in the remaining license covering Deep Cohasset for $1.3 million. The province will retain interest in the two Cohasset-Panuke production licenses. Mr. Speaker, the minister seems to be going for quick cash in order to balance the budget instead of holding on to an asset. And my first supplementary to the Minister of Finance: why did you, Mr. Minister, sell significant discovery licenses that could be worth much more than the $5.8 million and decide to keep those assets, which really aren't an asset at all?
The honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, government made the decision to sell the assets of NSRL. And Mr. Speaker, when we began the process, there were many on the opposite side that were saying that we received very little for it. And Mr. Speaker, we received almost in the vicinity of $400 million for those assets. The remaining assets at the end here, Mr. Speaker, were put out for requests for proposals, and the proceeds that came forward were the two that the honourable member opposite mentioned, and they were in the vicinity of about $6 million, Mr. Speaker. That pretty well concludes the chapter on NSRL, and because we as a government have made the decision that we would focus on things as people expect us to, such as health, education, and infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member of Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, if you translate that, it means another $5 million to try to balance the books this year, even though this finance minister sits in his place, or I should say stands in his place from time to time, and states that even though we're going to balance the books, we have to borrow money in this province just to get us through to the end of the year. My final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is the government gave up Deep Panuke for a song, and now it's giving away even more potential. My final supplementary to the minister: why is your government settling, Mr. Minister, for $5.8 million now when these significant discovery licenses could be worth much more in the future? Why are you giving it away?
The honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party can't have it both ways. They're saying that they, Mr. Speaker, would not add 1 cent to the debt. When we sell assets that many were saying had virtually no value, we did a commercial sale, Mr. Speaker, we received approximately $385 million. That's $385 million that the taxpayers of this province won't have to repay. Mr. Speaker, this government will stand by its actions, because we did so in the best interest of our province, and the value that we received was a fair one for the assets that we put on the market.
The honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, residents of nursing homes lost half of the $12.75 per diem relief before they even got it. And that's over and above the staggering rate increases many nursing homes levied on their residents in 2002. Rate increases, Mr. Speaker, anywhere from $41 to $59 a day in one fell swoop. In addition to paying for health care they shouldn't have to pay for, residents are also paying to keep the profit margins healthy for the parent companies. I want to ask the Minister of Health, why are you choosing the side of private for-profit nursing homes instead of the side of seniors and their families?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the profit margin on nursing homes, individual nursing homes, is looked at.
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The profit margin of nursing homes, Mr. Speaker, is looked at very carefully. And Mr. Speaker, both profit and non-for-profit nursing homes do see increase in costs, Mr. Speaker. This is something that happens every year. Mr. Speaker, our commitment is to help seniors with the medical care costs of nursing homes and to eventually take those over. That is the commitment we have made, and by 2007 we will have done that, and we will stop examining seniors' assets. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a very interesting reply from the Minister of Health, because, of course, private for-profit nursing homes hiked their rates last year by as much as $61.80 a day, and residents, the choice that they were given, pay up or move out, Mr. Speaker. The minister says that the profit margin of these homes is looked at very carefully. But, Mr. Speaker, how would anyone know? The Department of Health refuses to disclose the budgets for any privately owned nursing homes in Nova Scotia. Millions, Mr. Speaker, of taxpayers' dollars go into these facilities, and their budgets are not accountable to the public. I ask the Minister of Health, why do you continue to protect these nursing homes from being truly accountable for their spending?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, accountability for spending has been a hallmark of this government. And, Mr. Speaker, what we are looking at as an average increase, the Leader of the Opposition is quite right, is last year there was an average increase, across the province, in cost of about $26 a day. Mr. Speaker, we are no longer in the days where nursing homes can get 50-year mortgages. Mr. Speaker, nursing homes have to be improved, they have to be rebuilt, the rooms have to be expanded to accommodate the needs of the patients, there are capital costs that increase, and there are wages that increase, Mr. Speaker, for the nurses in the nursing homes. No one, Mr. Speaker, no Nova Scotian expects costs to remain exactly the same year after year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister has a choice. She could open the books and prove what she says and not hide behind them. The rates keep increasing. The nursing home residents keep paying. This government would rather attempt to buy the goodwill of voters than offer meaningful relief to nursing home residents. I want to ask the Minister of Health, we know the system is unfair. You know the system is unfair. Why doesn't your government end the practice when it had a chance?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And meaningful relief to nursing home residents is precisely what we are providing, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is for the Minister of Education, and it's again with relation to the Rankin School in Iona. Mr. Speaker, when Rankin School in Iona was first announced in 1999, it was determined that the opening date would be the fall of 2004. Mr. Speaker, I asked the Minister of Education on April 30th the status of Rankin School to inquire whether or not that was still the projected date. The House was informed that the school should not be delayed for more than a year. So my question to the Minister is, when was the site decided upon and first announced as the location of the new Rankin Memorial School in Iona?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. I'm not in a position to be able to provide the precise date. I can tell the honourable member in the House, Mr. Speaker, that the site has been confirmed and it has been purchased, and design work is now proceeding for the construction of that school.
The honourable member for Victoria on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister. Mr. Speaker, the site was first announced to a school advisory council in November of 2002. And at that time, Mr. Speaker, it was well known that getting three-phase electricity to the site was going to be an energy problem. Mr. Speaker, the Minister's answers to one of my questions suggested that the reason for the delay was one of infrastructure problems and getting three-phase electricity to the site. Mr. Speaker, there has been plenty of time since then for this problem, when this problem was first recognized. And I believe the Minister is still using the energy concerns as an excuse. So my question to the Minister is, will the Minister explain why his government has done nothing to address the energy problems over the last 6 months at the new site of the Rankin Memorial School?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, it is not often that I find myself in a situation to disagree with the honourable member for Victoria, but I do disagree with his assertion that we have done nothing. We have worked diligently with respect to resolving this matter. As I indicated in my first answer, the design of that school is proceeding, and the school will be under construction shortly. And Mr. Speaker, I'm quite confident that while the school may not be completed precisely on schedule, that it will be as close to schedule as possible.
Honourable member for Victoria, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in a letter from the chair of the local school board to the Honourable Minister in April, it mentions that the Department of Education officials informed the board that the reason for the delay in construction of the Rankin School is due to cash flow difficulties. My question to the ministers: what happened to the funding that was set aside to build Rankin Memorial School when it was first announced in 1999?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm familiar with the correspondence to which the honourable member refers, and I was quite concerned when I read that correspondence. I checked with my office, and I was told, Mr. Speaker, that that is not the reason for the delay, that the reason for the delay is as outlined by the honourable member in his first supplementary, and we appear to be in a position of resolving those difficulties, and we're now designing the school with the intention of proceeding with the construction with the funds required for that construction in place.
Honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Well, Mr. Speaker, since the Minister of Health says that accountability is a hallmark of this government, I'll give her an opportunity to prove that, Mr. Speaker, with a very simple question. The province still has not publicly released the DHA budgets, despite the fact her government's own budget for this fiscal year has detailed line items for DHA funding. My simple question to the Minister of Health is, will she confirm whether the combined DHA budgets show a deficit?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I will certainly commit to releasing the budgets when they are finalized. I believe that's in the process of happening right now. But Mr. Speaker, yes, there were deficits in the DHA budgets at the end of the year. I don't think that was a secret. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister knows full well we're talking about the fiscal year we're currently in. Mr. Speaker, Minister of Health under the former government raised the ire of the Auditor General when he kept health board budgets in draft form. This allowed him to keep the budgets from scrutiny by this House. Minister, your DHA budget should be available by now, but your Department of Health is refusing to release them. I want to ask the Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker, what instruction her department has provided to DHAs who are forced to operate with draft budgets which show deficits.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I can't speak to what my department may or may not be refusing to release if she's referring to Freedom of Information requests, because I wouldn't know about that, Mr. Speaker. We are not informed of these things. But, Mr. Speaker, I certainly will commit to release the budgets as soon as they are finalized, and Mr. Speaker, they will not be in draft form all year. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Now, member for Halifax Needham, on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this government made a big deal about announcing 3-year funding so there could be planning by the DHAs, yet it appears they have no budgets in place. Now, Mr. Speaker, the fact is my office has received calls from senior DHA officials informing us that combined deficits are in the range of $40 million. The province has instructed them not to make this information public. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are 3 ways to address DHA deficits. 1, the province absorbs the losses, in which your balance is no longer budget. 2, you jack up the user fees again. Or 3, you make cuts. My question to the minister is, why won't you release those budgets which are required under the Act to be released within 30 days, Mr. Speaker, so members of this House can see whether DHAs are projecting deficits for this fiscal year.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I find it a bit odd that deficits that in the past couple of years have been, reduced to tiny percentages of the operating budget compared to previous deficits of 180 million and 132 million, would be absorbing the time of this House. But, Mr. Speaker, I have committed and will commit to be releasing the budgets of the DHAs when they're finalized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, children and youth suffering with mental health issues are in a desperate need in this province. My office has finally learned the full extent of this situation. I want to table a memo submitted by the former Minister of Health last October. It states that the families have been forced to relinquish their children to the Minister of Community Services to access care, that youth have been detained by the police or held in hotels in an effort to gain access to mental health services. It says that services are contracted out, which is expensive and often ineffective because the current system can't meet the needs. Mr. Minister of Health, what will it take for your government to make the children and youth a priority?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the member from Dartmouth North is quite right. There are many pressing cases for children and youth, and we recognize that. That is one of the reasons that we introduced new mental health initiatives this winter and provided funding for them, and they will be directly targeting children and youth most in need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the recent initiatives announced by this government just aren't good enough. The community treatment teams are leaving out children in Royal Nova Scotia. The planned residential treatment facility will have just 12 beds, when approximately 30 youth are sent out of the province every year. The total cost of these two projects will be $3 million next year. The government's communication plans says that for the last 10 years, government has been criticized for not putting more money into the mental health services for children and youth. Minister of Health, why has your government refused to really address the needs of children and youth in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there are a great many health care needs in Nova Scotia for people of all ages. And Mr. Speaker, because we recognize children and youth as an important priority, that is why we announced the initiatives we did, Mr. Speaker. And I would say that we are making progress, Mr. Speaker, and we will make progress. And that 12 beds is better than no beds, and we will get there, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Now, Member for Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that just simply is not good enough.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, another memo submitted by the former Minister of Health acknowledges that children are waiting up to 1 year for services. 1 year for services, Mr. Speaker. This government knows that the current system isn't working, but they refuse to fully address the problem. Families and children are suffering. They've been neglected by this government and the previous Liberal government before them. Minister of Health, will your government put people first and fully address the mental health needs of the children of this province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the new facility and the intensive teams, community-based teams, are proof this government is serious about doing something for children and youth with mental health difficulties. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, the Premier of this province is proving that he'll consider anything as long as there's a chance it might help him get re-elected. Whether it be the debt, Sunday shopping, or vote rebates, this Premier will just about try anything. Yep. Mr. Speaker, today the Premier expressed amazement that private insurance companies didn't come up with a solution of their own for the skyrocketing rates. Now the Premier now is musing about public insurance with the other Atlantic provinces as the possible solution. Mr. Speaker, No one has told Nova Scotians what public insurance would look like or how much it would cost, other than the minister responsible, who has hinted it could cost between $300 to $500 million to the Nova Scotia taxpayer. So my question to the Premier, based on his musings, now that he's considering public insurance, will he tell Nova Scotians exactly how much it will cost the taxpayer to get this public system up and running?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the whole issue of insurance is a tremendous problem for Nova Scotians, and we are being reminded of that on a regular basis when we talk with Nova Scotians, when we receive information from them. If you look at the report that came from the UARB as well, the insurance companies haven't been faring too well. What this government is going to do is come up with a rational plan that results in fair premiums for Nova Scotians in an industry that can be supported.
Now a member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, 4 years ago we were promised strong leadership and a clear course. Imagine what we're left with here today, Mr. Speaker, on the eve of an election. Mr. Speaker, the Premier says he just can't understand why private companies didn't come up with a solution on their own, and now he says he's considering a maritime public insurance plan. Well, Mr. Speaker, why doesn't the Premier just put Maritime Union back on the table? Because that's certainly a fast-moving file. We can only hope that this one will move just as quickly. Mr. Speaker, if the Premier is considering interprovincial public insurance, he should be able to tell Nova Scotians what this would cost. This Premier has promised Nova Scotians a debt reduction plan, but he has not released it. Instead, he intends to borrow till 2013. So my question to the Premier is, what effect would a public insurance system have on any plan to pay down the debt of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite clearly is more interested in asking questions that he feels will advance his political opportunities. What this government is interested in doing is finding a resolution to a very vexing problem that is affecting the lives of Nova Scotians. And if the member opposite could provide any suggestions, we'd be very pleased to entertain them.
Now a member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in 1999, strong leadership, a clear course, big picture of leader of the Tory party saying, I will lead this province, I will have the answer to the problems of today. Now we see the Premier saying, please help me, I've failed and I don't know what to do. First, it's no public insurance, now maybe public insurance, now maybe maritime insurance. What next, Mr. Speaker, from this Premier? Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians have seen that this Premier has not had a debt reduction plan.
Question, please.
Now he is musing about adding to the debt with the possibility of a public insurance plan, and he can't figure out why private companies haven't solved this. My question to the Premier is, why won't the Premier simply demonstrate leadership on the issue of insurance and put forward today a feasible plan instead of interprovincial insurance schemes, or hoping that the private companies will come up with a solution of their own?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan, and the plan involves a number of things. First of all, it was referring the issue to the UARB, which have indicated that, in fact, unusual profits have not been accruing to the insurance companies. In addition, we put out a discussion paper to allow Nova Scotians to look at some reasonable options and to provide us with some input. In addition, we have appointed an insurance advocate who will go out and as well retrieve from Nova Scotians their concerns about insurance, any suggestions they might have. And when all of this comes together, we will come forward with a reasonable and cogent plan that will, in fact, provide the very best insurance rates that we could possibly provide in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier, who is taking responsibility for skyrocketing insurance rates. The government has tried to lead Nova Scotians into thinking that there was a freeze on auto insurance costs, but every day, Mr. Speaker, people are getting renewal notices and find that they have much higher rates. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Premier tried to create the impression that his government is considering a driver-owned plan. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the Premier, will you explain why people should believe you when your own minister calls driver-owned insurance, quote, a crackpot scheme, unquote?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And,
Order, please. The Honourable the Premier.
The member opposite, I think, correctly points out that the government is looking at all possible options. On the other hand, I don't think we should let the leader of the opposition get away scot-free, because if the government had followed the advice that his caucus was giving to the government, in other words, simply go back and freeze rates going back many, many months, we would have had a monumental meltdown in insurance in the province of Nova Scotia today, and tens of thousands of Nova Scotians would be being refused insurance. Thank goodness we didn't listen to that member.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the only monumental meltdown in this province is the electoral prospects of the government. That's the only. The Conservatives want to tell the insurance companies that. The Conservatives tell the insurance company that non-profit driver-owned plan is a crackpot scheme. The Conservatives tell drivers that under a non-profit driver-owned plan that is under consideration that they will do it sometime in the misty future. And then, Mr. Speaker, they have the gall to say that it is the Liberal leader whose policies swing like the weather vane. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier of skyrocketing insurance rates explain why his government is floundering in its approach to an issue that is so important to Nova Scotians?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the government has come forward with a very, I think, comprehensive plan. One of the elements of that plan is a piece of legislation. And the minute that legislation passes, we can start by regulation adjusting some of the inequities that have been allowed to creep into the premium process of insurance. So if the members opposite really want the government to get going, they'll pass the bill.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NDP task force reported on March 24th that the driver-owned plans have the lowest rates and the slowest increases in rates in the country. Our task force reported on May 7th that the only driver-owned plans that do not discriminate on the basis of age, gender, or marital status are those same driver-owned non-profit insurance plans. In light of this evidence, Mr. Premier, will you explain why your government has worked so hard to get drivers to accept a cut in benefits rather than working hard to understand the option of driver-owned, non-profit auto insurance?
The Honourable the Premier.
It must be, Mr. Speaker, very disappointing for the Leader of the Opposition to have the rug pulled out from under him by the UARB report, who clearly articulated there is a real fundamental problem in terms of premiums and payouts. And regardless of what the ultimate resolution of this issue is for the people of Nova Scotia, that is now a proven fact. What I can't understand, Mr. Speaker, that party opposite on many occasions has urged the government, have exhorted the government to go to the UARB with certain questions to get a non-political answer. But when the answer doesn't suit them, then, in fact, they even abandon the UARB.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is right about one thing. That was a very disappointing response. So I'm going to move on to the Minister who is actually responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates. The Minister says his plan has been unfolding as it should for some 18 months now. The Minister will therefore be able to explain how his government has developed the proposal for a driver-owned non-profit insurance plan that the Premier discussed with Prince Edward Island. So my question is this: when and how does the Minister intend to unveil all the good work that he's done to develop the government's proposal for driver-owned non-profit auto insurance?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we will unveil our plan when the opposition stops their political gamemanship and puts impediments in the way of the government acting, not talking.
I'm the Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians deserve to know whether this government has been doing anything more than making things up as they go along in an effort to dodge the auto insurance issue throughout the election that the Premier says will take place in 2003. Two provinces, Mr. Speaker, with the same size population as ours have established driver-owned insurance plans that are so successful that no political party dares to interfere with them. So my question is this: why is this government still trying to come up with excuses for not proceeding immediately toward the one choice that gives the lowest and fairest rates a driver-owned plan?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, if rhetoric was going to solve this problem, then obviously the opposition could probably solve it. But, Mr. Speaker, it cannot be solved by rhetoric, but it can be solved by legislation. We have the legislation in this House, and that party over there, Mr. Speaker, is not permitting us to proceed.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, in a long list of ridiculous things the minister has said, that is perhaps the worst because he knows, like everybody else, that the legislation is retroactive no matter when it is passed. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia drivers want to know if the option that offers the lowest and fairest rates is really on the government agenda, or is it just a barrage of flack as the Conservatives try to avoid detection of their real plan to cut benefits for the sake of company profits. Drivers deserve to know why this is suddenly a matter of regional cooperation days after it was called a crackpot scheme. So my question is this: why should anyone believe that the Premier's focus on regional cooperation is anything more than the latest Tory excuse to avoid the lowest and fairest rates for Nova Scotians?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, it's very hard to count.
Please. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, this is so simple that I cannot understand why an educated person across the way cannot grasp the fact that this government needs to put in place regulations, and those regulations are dependent on an act being passed through this House. That bill is on the floor. You would think that the opposition would be trying their very best to expedite it rather than stall it.
Now a member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, all Novas.
Order, please. Order, please. Now a member for Richmond.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. All Nova Scotians now know that the Premier has broken his promise made to Nova Scotians not to add to debt as per his Blue Book in 1999. In fact, he missed that target by at least $521 million, and probably more after Nova Scotians finished paying for this Premier's pre-election of commitments, which now surpass $700 million. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Deputy Minister of Finance told the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, quote, "With the budget out of the way, I was told now it's time to move on to giving us the specific debt reduction plan," end quote. Now, Mr. Speaker, if this government's debt reduction plan is as concrete and as accurate and specific as their insurance plan, heaven help us all in this province. Mr. Speaker, given that the Deputy Minister of Finance is directly responsible to the Premier overall, I would ask, could the Premier indicate why a debt reduction plan has been but a mere afterthought of this government?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And if the member opposite would turn to page 18, there's a specific commitment that we made to Nova Scotians back in July of 1999, and that is that during the course of this mandate, we would come up with a debt reduction plan with specific targets, and we will do that. We will provide that to Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, one can also look in the Blue Book and say my government will live within its means. I will respect Nova Scotian voters, a clear course, strong leadership, something that we just have not seen in the last 4 years under this government. Mr. Speaker, the debt is now approaching $12 billion, and Nova Scotians cannot wait any longer for this Premier to act. Debt servicing charges are continuing to grow, and that is money that we cannot spend on new schools, roads, or hospitals in this province. Mr. Speaker, the Deputy said that he would have a plan to present to Cabinet this month. So my question to the Premier again is why won't the Premier simply table in this House his debt reduction plan if indeed it has ever been a real priority of this government?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And we will be providing publicly the debt reduction plan when the appropriate opportunity presents itself. But, you know, one of the things that continues to amaze me is when did that caucus become converted to strong fiscal management? It certainly could not have occurred to them between 1963 or 1993 and 1999, when annually they were adding almost $600 million to the debt each and every year. $3.6 billion being added to the debt during the 6 years of their stay in office. And clearly put, they did leave us with a tremendous challenge, Mr. Speaker, but we have met the challenge. We have met the Blue Book challenge, and once we have completed every single challenge that we set ourselves in the Blue Book, then we will take that opportunity to go and defend our record with the people of Nova Scotia by way of an election.
Order,
we
please.
Will keep our
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Now, Member Richmond, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, for the Premier today to stand in this House and to suggest that in 1993, the government of the day, led by the Premier of the day, did not bring about efforts to bring financial stability and deal with deficit is absolutely disgraceful for this Premier to stand here and say that today. And I think the Premier knows that those comments are disrespectful and disgraceful for him to be making those kind of statements today for pure political reasons.
Order, please. Order, please. Now, member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians will judge him for those comments. Mr. Speaker, this government is taking in $1 billion more in revenue this year due to added user fees and taxation. Ironically, that is what we will now be paying of Nova Scotians' money to foreign banks on debt service charges. Mr. Premier, if the Premier does not care about the situation today, at least he could prove that he cares about the next generation, especially even his own grandchildren.
Order, please.
My final supplement.
Order, please. How dare anyone question anybody on the length of their question? The Honourable Member for Richmond, your final supplementary only, please.
Yes, glass house over there, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, if the Premier was serious about debt reduction, why can he not give the elected members of this House some indication of what his debt plan might look like instead of offering only platitudes and partisan posturing on this important question?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite did suggest that this member owed him an apology if I was inferring that they didn't try to conquer the deficit monster that was part of the challenge when they became government. Yes, I do believe that they made an effort to bring the deficit under control, but, Mr. Speaker, they failed. Yes. That's the issue. They failed. And we have succeeded, Mr. Speaker. They tried for 6 years and they failed. And we, in 3 years, have conquered the deficit monster.
Now, a member for Halifax Needham. Order, please. Order, please. Y'all member Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, a media report on Monday discusses a shortage of X-ray and laboratory technologists, particularly in the Antigonish area. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a document obtained through the Freedom of Information Act in which Department of Health staff states, and I quote, Nova Scotia is in the most perilous position of all the Canadian provinces, with 60% of the current medical laboratory technologist workforce expected to retire by 2016. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the minister, why are you stating in the media that this shortage isn't a crisis when technologists and your own staff are telling you otherwise?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there are actually two separate issues here that are getting somewhat mixed up, and there's a reason for that. But Mr. Speaker, the issue of X-ray technologists is one of the issues. The other issue is that of the medical lab technologists. And the issue that we are addressing with the med lab technologists, to which the member referred, is the reason that we are training 25 instead of 3 in the year upcoming with this new program with the community college, because in fact we do recognize that there is going to be an issue with the shortage of medical laboratory technologists. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister didn't answer the question. Technologists say we're losing graduates to other provinces who offer far more competitive salaries than Nova Scotia. Salaries are a huge issue for graduates because of the huge debt load this province forces on them to accumulate in order to get training. The student loan remission program, Mr. Speaker, you will remember, was there to help many of these graduates manage their debt and stay in this province. I want to ask the minister, since your government axed the loan remission program, will you now admit you had a part to play in driving off much-needed technologists?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, no government can prevent every single person from leaving Nova Scotia, but we are making great efforts to try to keep people here, Mr. Speaker. But since the member brought up the issue of salaries, I'd like to say that the national average is about $36,700 to about $46,000, and ours is between $36,000 and $43,000, Mr. Speaker, and that is fairly competitive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that these technologists are able to take summer vacations in other provinces, which they're not going to be able to do here. Mr. Speaker, the minister thinks buying more seats and offering a few bursaries is going to bring technologists back to Nova Scotia. Bursaries in exchange for working in Nova Scotia doesn't help much, Mr. Speaker, when you graduate and you owe as much as $40,000 in student loans. So I want to ask the Minister of Health, when are you going to put some meaningful measures in place to address this issue?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And one would think, Mr. Speaker, from that question that the member opposite is not in favour of buying more seats and is not in favour of bursaries. These are measures that help keep people in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I guess we'll get a chance to see just how much more of a disgrace the Premier can make of himself today. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, before public accounts, the Deputy Minister of Finance referred to the public sector pension plan when he said, quote, "We are going to be making some presentations to Cabinet over the next little while with respect to pension funds and bring them up to date as to where we stand with those pension funds," end quote. Mr. Speaker, I've asked for an update in February and the Minister of Finance said he'd be ready in March. Then in the House, the Minister was saying sometime in the spring, and now we are told it won't be until June when the actuarial report will be ready. So my question is to the Premier, and since the Finance Minister is incapable of providing this information, and considering that the taxpayer is ultimately responsible for any pension losses, why is the Cabinet, the Tory Cabinet, privileged to this information and not the people of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
I refer that to the Minister of Finance.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, the only disgrace here is the line of questioning opposite. I should point out, Mr. Speaker, last year, and I will stand corrected, it wasn't the NDP, it was the Liberal caucus in that regard. And I will say, Mr. Speaker, that last year the pension The annual reports for the pensions were reported to the House in the fall. This year, I have indicated to the House that they'll be ready. They'll be ready prior to that. The member opposite is correct that it'll be sometimes in June. Mr. Speaker, when the information is ready, it shall be shared with the people of Nova Scotia. That is my commitment then. It's my commitment today.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy of Finance made it clear that there were quarterly updates being provided to the Department of Finance as to the performance of these pension funds. Being the last quarterly update was in November 30th of 2002, I think even the Minister of Finance's math would tell him that by May 15th of this year, another quarter has passed, and yet we have not been provided with those numbers. So, Speaker, the Deputy indicated that there has been underachievement in the targets set out by the Pension Investment Committee. The Deputy indicated that he will table that information before this committee, yet we haven't seen anything of it yet. Mr. Speaker, by the government not coming forward and providing the quarterly update and where these pensions are, it leaves Nova Scotians with the impression they have something to hide. Therefore, I ask to the Premier again, when will you order the Minister of Finance to tell Nova Scotians exactly what is the state of the pension plans and how much has the Investment Committee underachieved on those pensions?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I was quite satisfied with the answer that the Minister of Finance gave to a similar question that was directed to him.
Honourable member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Open and accountable, strong leadership, clear course, respect voters. Where did all that go, Mr. Speaker? Where did all that go? 4 years, and now they hide the truth about the public pensions, Nova Scotians' own money, what many civil servants, teachers and others are relying upon for their future. This government will not tell them what the health of those plans are. We know as of November, one of those plans was $500 million underfunded. Therefore, I ask the Premier again, you have the quarterly report for this spring in your government's hands. I ask you again, if you have nothing to hide, why will you simply not tell Nova Scotians what that quarterly report indicated about the pension plans?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer that to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the member opposite talks about being open and accountable. Mr. Speaker, we have brought about the most transparent accounting procedures in the country versus that gang across the room that couldn't shoot straight, Mr. Speaker, who told Nova Scotians they had balanced the budget when they had deficits in hospital boards, when they had deficits in Cisco, when they had deficits in NSRL. They told the people they had a balanced budget when they had a deficit of $500 million. Mr. Speaker, with regards to the pension funds, teachers sit on that committee, Mr. Speaker. Civil servants sit on that committee. They are well represented. Those funds are sound. They're invested over the long term. The Liberal Party is trying to make some...
Order, please. Order, please. The member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question will be for the Minister of Environment and Labour. All-terrain vehicle use is a serious concern to the residents of this province, yet in spite of the public safety and environmental issues involved, this government continues to drag its heels. Last year, the Department of Environment and Labour took part in an internal review on this issue, and now the minister says they need another study. So I'd like to table the first study now, and it's called Strategies to Promote the Responsible Use of Off-Highway Vehicles in Nova Scotia. Minister, we've been waiting for 4 years. When can we expect your government to finally take some action on this issue?
Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we have taken action. We've taken the action of consulting with Nova Scotians by an outside body from government.
The honourable member for Hants East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're dealing with a government that studies studies and then studies some more. The latest study actually released under a request of Freedom of Information this month, recommends a number of initiatives that would protect the environment and improve public safety. It calls for legislation and regulations that would provide for effective management of off-highway vehicles. It also calls for legislation that would prevent the use of ATVs in environmentally sensitive areas. Minister, no one believes that you need to study this issue any longer. So why are you refusing to introduce measures that would improve safety and protect the environment?
Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, that simply shows how out of touch that honourable member is, because the agricultural industry, the tourism industry, the users generally across the province welcome this study by the government to come forward with a policy for ATVs.
Now, a member for Hants East on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, unfortunately, they're in the position of welcoming anything that might possibly get some action, but they haven't seen any from this government or this minister. Mr. Speaker, off-highway vehicles are incredibly popular throughout this province. Like any other motor vehicle, they need effective regulation. Nova Scotia has some of the highest accident rates in the country, and many of our most sensitive areas are not adequately protected. Minister, how much longer are you going to put the public safety and our environment at risk?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, there are in excess of 40,000 of those vehicles in this province, almost 50,000 probably by the end of this year. And Mr. Speaker, I shouldn't say they all support, but the responsible users support the study that we're having undertaken by voluntary planning. And Mr. Speaker, I point out to the honourable member that the environmental community of this province welcome the fact that voluntary planning is looking into this problem.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. And I'll tell you why. It's not that agriculture and fisheries aren't important, they are. But the Honourable Minister is also the Minister responsible for the Sydney Steel Corporation. So, I'm wondering if he could bring the House up to date with reference to the sale of the Sydney Steel plant, the operating part of it, the electric arc reduction furnace and the universal mill and the intervening parts, to the Zoom Development Company of India, which intends, as I understand it, to take the steel plant apart piece by piece, labeling each one, put them on ships to India, and then reassemble them at the other end so they can make steel and sell it to Nova Scotia. Could the Minister bring us up to date on that particular scheme or plan?
The Minister responsible for Sydney Steel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question because he brings a very important issue to the
Now, a member for Sydney Steel has the floor.
The way in which this government has responded to its responsibility around the decommissioning of Cisco. We've been able to move forward very aggressively. We've been able to invest in that area in terms of putting in a highway infrastructure that was much needed. In terms of Zoom, yes, we are proceeding to have them move forward to dismantle the electric arc furnace and take it offshore because it's clear after 40 some odd years, actually 100 years, the last 40 of which it never turned a profit, that you can't make steel at that facility in Nova Scotia and make money. I wish Zoom best of luck, and what we've done is gone outside of to a global market to find the best value for Nova Scotian taxpayers. So it is an important issue, and I'm glad he brought it here for consideration.
I'll member for Cape Breton Nova on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear him say that they were zooming ahead, but perhaps they are. Time will tell. Now, Mr. Speaker, concurrent with the operational steel plant zooming to India, I wonder if the Minister could update the House on the other Cisco-related activities his department now has underway in terms of the demolition of the existing steel plant that was down, that is between the EAF and the docks, the blast furnaces, the open hearth department, etc. It's all gone right now and being sold as scrap, I understand, by the shipload. Could the Minister confirm the intent of the government with that particular activity?
Minister responsible for Sydney Steel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yes, we are taking down facilities that will not be needed and selling it for scrap, and that's bringing money into the province. But in terms of the long-term plan, we went out and had a private consultant who very successfully dealt with the redevelopment of the former Moncton rail yards, and they have a plan in place that will see that structure and that facility be an economic engine into the future. And what we're doing is taking the time now to ensure that the planning will allow those facilities that can be of use into the future to remain and be upgraded. In fact, we now have tenants on site who are using the buildings. We have an anchor tenant in Provincial Energy Ventures that are going to be there for the long term. So what we've done is ensured that the infrastructure in place...
Order, please. Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. Government business, the Honourable Government House Leader. The Honourable Government House Leader on government business.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rise on a point of order. Earlier in the session today, Mr. Speaker, a reference was made to the absence of the Premier from the House, and I advised the opposition that they had been informed, and they said that they had not. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have two faxes, one to the NDP caucus and one to the Liberal caucus, which was dispatched at shortly after 10 o'clock this morning, and they are receipted. So if you'd like copies of those, I'll table them.
So an apology would be good.
It's not obviously not a point of order. It's a clarification of the facts for the House and clarification of the information. The Honourable Government House Leader on government business. Government House Leader on government business.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, back to business. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 52, the Cosmetology Act?
Bill number 52, the Cosmetology Act. The Honourable Minister of Education. The Honourable Minister of Education.
I move that this bill be now read a second time, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to explain how these amendments will increase protection for Nova Scotians who are consumers of hairdressing and aesthetic services. I wish to acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, the presence in the gallery of Kim Carter, the Executive Director of the Cosmetology Association of Nova Scotia, and Susan Clark, who is the Executive Director of Post-Secondary Education for the Department of Education, and Carol Lowthers, who is the Director of Private and Career Colleges, who has worked in the development of this legislation. Mr. Speaker, the association is responsible for regulating the industry in the province, and they wanted us to update the Act to increase consumer protection, and we were happy to be able to do that. You'll recall that last fall we passed amendments that expanded the definition of